Want to attract and convert more leads? Want to learn how digital PR, branding, and SEO can establish and build your brand identity? Welcome to the Market Movers Building Brands and Links with Linkifi podcast. We answer these questions and help you ramp up your brand visibility and credibility. Let's cut through the noise and make your business the talk of the town. We're your hosts, Nick and Chris. Let's get this show on the road.
Today, it is an absolute pleasure to be joined by the one and only Mads Singers. Mads is a management consultant with deep-seated roots in the SEO community, as well as working with Fortune 500 companies like Xero and IBM. He is the co-founder and head of product development at HeyRamp, where he streamlines management processes. Today, he will talk to us about how we can master hiring, delegation, and people management in order to push our business to 7 figures and beyond. Finally, Mads is a prolific speaker, and myself and Nick have had the luxury of seeing him deliver huge amounts of value on multiple occasions. And last but not least, if you are able to see Mads at a conference, corner him at the bar and buy him a drink, and he will give you thousands of dollars worth of consulting completely free of charge. Welcome, Mads.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm apparently easy to abuse with I can hear.
All right, Mads, it is wonderful to have you on. All right, so you are well known in the SEO community for leadership in management training. So why don't you start by just telling us how you got to this place?
Yeah, I mean, I used to work in the corporate world, so I used to work with big companies like Xerox and IBM. And management really been my passion since I was about 18. So I spent a ton of time learning, growing, developing, and really becoming a great manager. And this is obviously my passion. So I really love building teams. I love building businesses, and which is why I own 6 of them. And I like helping other people do the same. So every year I'm currently on it at the moment. So I typically travel around the world for 3-4 months and just speak at a lot of events and have a really fun time. Don't do much work, but really enable my companies to be set up in a way where I can do that is important for me. I think many business owners, they build a business and the business is really depending on them. And, if they take a week out, a month out or something, the business is not in great shape. And really what I initially started out with was really helping my clients get out of that situation. The 2 clients I help the most are probably 3 avatars. So number 1 is people who really want to get out of their business. They build a business, they're making a lot of money. They want to have some time to actually enjoy those money. So that's one. The second one is people who want to get out of the business, but they still want to be heavily involved and grow it, but they need to get out of working in the business so they can work on it instead, right? And then lastly, I work with quite a few people who just want to grow faster. Like they're eager to really scale up. And reality is in most businesses, people are promoted into management roles without any training. And really that slows down a lot of things, right? When you promote people into a management role and don't give them the sort of training and support they need to become a good manager, they're very likely not. Right. And it's not because they're a bad person. It's just because management is a skill like everything else. And just because you're a good SEO or a good salesperson or whatever, doesn't mean you're automatically a good manager. Generally, what I tend to say is if you can learn to be great at something, if you can learn to be a great SEO, if you can learn to be a great engineer, if you can learn to be a great sales guy, you can learn how to be a great manager. But it doesn't automatically make you one.
Yeah. Doesn't automatically translate. Okay, so in light of that, then what challenges do you see remote companies face when it comes to management training?
So honestly, people ask me, they tend to phrase the question slightly different if it's easier to manage remote or if it's easier to manage in person. And generally what I would say is if you have poor managers, in person is generally slightly better because there's certain communication, there's certain touch point that just happens in a physical environment that doesn't necessarily happen in a virtual environment if the manager doesn't know what they're doing, right? And reality is management is a lot about personal relationships. It's a lot about touch points. It's a lot about communicating with your staff. Poor managers generally don't have the time to talk with their staff, aka they're too busy doing the work instead of actually managing, which is one of those mindsets that leads to failure, right? But those situations are, basically, if you have managers that are not good, then remote is very difficult and very dangerous. Whereas if you have good managers, you often get the same or sometimes even more out of remote workers. And I mean, my companies for the last 10, 11 years have been built pretty much remotely. So we have 300 plus staff across all the businesses at the moment, right? So we have a lot of staff, and it's relatively easy managed remotely because our managers are very good at what they do.
I've trained by you.
Is there an operation system that you recommend? Within the remote work community, there's a lot of talk about EOS from the Traction book. I hear great things about that, but also a lot of companies that struggle to implement it because it's very in-depth. What do you recommend on the operations side?
Yeah, so I mean, I love EOS. I think it's a little bit like you say, a bad plan is better than no plan. And I think EOS is one of these things that if you're doing something with some kind of purpose, it's better than not having a purpose, right? I think EOS is generally great. I think it's a very, very big thing to implement. And there's definitely pieces of it I don't necessarily agree with. But again, having a framework is definitely better than not having a framework. So it's a decent starting point. What I would say is I generally have my own type of framework. It's definitely not as detailed, but it's much more simplistic. So the focus I have in my training is really how can I take people through in one day what they should really be doing as a leader and as a business owner, right? And my focus with that is really core, because I think the big challenge with something like EOS is when you have a busy business owner, it's very difficult for them to take out weeks and months of their life to actually go and implement things like EOS, right? So my whole focus is that majority of clients I work with in a day or two, they can really get the 80-20 of what they need to be effective, right? And I think that's, for me, the most important piece is how do you scale up? How do you get the most value with the least impact, if you will, right? So that's typically how I look at it, right? In general, I think the core aspects of people management is really boils down to 3 key points. It's about, number 1 is about understanding people. Number 2 is about having company-wide processes of what you're doing. Because again, the biggest thing is when you're having managers who are doing things wildly differently, you will get very different results, right? So just like other processes in your business, you want to have management processes that are somewhat aligned throughout the business. And then the third piece is really around making sure that you're growing your staff, both your management staff, but also your other staff on a regular basis. I think growth of humans is probably the biggest neglect when you look at companies out there. So that there's people who are great in every company, or in most companies at least, there's great people. And the worst thing you can do is not helping those people grow, because those are the people that will really make a difference in your business. And if you as a manager, if you as a business owner, you're holding them back by not delegating and not giving them ownership and responsibility, then that's the biggest aspect of it where I see companies really slow themselves down significantly.
So where are you, or how are you seeing a best way to implement that growth then of existing staff, like through continued professional development or retreats? What sort of thing?
It's really in my framework that I teach my clients, right? So the core aspects is, number 1 is about delegation. So the way you grow, like anyone listening to this podcast, right? The reason why they're in a situation right now where they're either a manager or running a business is because at some point someone trusted them. At some point, and that could be a client, but at some point someone trusted them and said, hey, you go figure this out, right? And for some people, it was a boss that said, hey, we have a website, we have no traffic, can you figure out how to solve that? For some people, it was like, hey, we were doing good at SEO, we're not doing good at SEO anymore, can you fix it? Or the likes, right? So people have obviously slightly different stories, but the whole point is that you don't become successful if someone out there is not giving you ownership and responsibility to figure things out, right? And that includes making mistakes. It includes burning your fingers. But in the end of the day, you're gonna figure things out. And that, like, delegation of responsibility is probably the biggest thing that it takes to grow and develop your staff. The second aspect is then really around management training, because what you want to do is the people that are going in that direction, at least, you want to make sure that before they're put into a management role, they actually start learning about what management is. Because the thing is, if you first start figuring out what management is the day you're promoted into a management role, then it's going to take you a long time to learn. And the problem for a company is that if you start failing for the first 9-12 months, that's not very helpful for the business, right? So you really want to put people in a situation where they spend time with their boss, where you have a sort of clear system in your company where if a manager is leaving or if a manager is getting promoted, well, who's next in line, right? Who's been getting trained for it, and who's gonna be that person, right? And that's critically important from my point of view in companies, right? To have that and to really have a system where you sort of encourage the growth of people.
So how do you determine who's ready to move up to management? Maybe you know a few months down the road you're going to be promoting somebody else, or somebody else is going to be leaving. How do you identify that person that's going to come in? And then are there situations where it makes sense, like if you look at the people you have, maybe you don't feel like you have anyone that could take that place? When would you think about hiring externally for a larger management position?
Yeah. So key thing here is that everyone can learn to manage. Right, so management is a skill. A lot of the time people look at people that are super assertive or people with a certain kind of behavior, but really anyone can learn the skill of management. What I look at when I'm looking at management is really understanding, well, what is the kind of manager that we are in need of in this particular team at this particular time, right? So there's something looking at the sort of personality that you're looking for. Now, really, it comes down to finding great people. And when I say great people, what I mean specifically with that is people who are putting in the effort, people who are taking those extra steps. Like in most companies, there's people who are inspired, there's people who are excited, there's people who just show up every single day, put in the work, and they're really, I mean, and it's obvious, right? Like when you have a team, like there's just people who stand out, right? And you want to take those ideally top performers. I'm not saying it have to be the number one performer, but if you have a team of 10 people, you ideally want it to be your sort of top 3 performers, because fundamentally you also want to show the team and you want to show everyone in your company that you're promoting your best people, right? Because you want to make it clear to people that if you perform extremely well, there's opportunities in the business, and that's key for me. But that's how I pinpoint the people, really. So it's really a question of figuring out like who are the people who are putting in everything, who are the people, and everyone needs to develop, right? Some people, when they're looking to move into a management role, some people need to learn to control their temper. Some people need to learn more management skills, more sort of people management, as in they need to learn how to communicate better. Some people need to learn to be a little bit more assertive. So everyone have things they need to learn to become a great manager. Doesn't matter who they are. But it really starts with identifying those right people who really embodies your values, who really, show up every day and you can feel they're committed, right? That's the number one step. Now, after that, what we always try and do is we try and have them backing up their manager. So that means if the manager's away or whatever, instead of not having a manager in the meeting, you want to send someone from the team, right? So you want to send the next in line to represent the team so that they start getting exposure to some of those higher level discussions. They start getting more exposure to those higher level people in the company. And that's a great way to see how they respond to things and how they need to be developed and so on. So that's typically one of my favorite ways to really push that, right? And Besides that, you also want to make sure that the people you're pinpointing, that you're showing them a development path. You're showing them, hey, you're great. We want to make you even greater. So if you want to get into this level, if you want to become a manager of this team or whatever, here's things you need to learn, right? And I think people are generally motivated to learn and become better, right? The biggest challenge is that management is such a mindset change compared to an individual contributor role. What happens with most individual contributors are that they get promoted because they're great at something. So let's say they're great at link building and you promote them. Because they're promoted because they're great at link building, they keep doing link building because that's what got them promoted in the first place. Whereas really the fundamental mindset is the second you manage other people, what you do as an individual doesn't matter. It's all about what the team delivers. And really getting into that mindset takes time, and it takes, you really have to go through that mindset a little bit to really get that hammered in, right?
There must be, I mean, you say it's a skill which everyone can learn. There must be situations that arise for companies where somebody has been promoted to a management position and it's not working out. They're not delivering. Maybe even the roles turn toxic and the performance of the team is suffering. How do you identify these situations and what are some strategies you can use to rectify that problem?
Again, one of my favorite tactics is I always tell people, always be upfront with people and say, hey, we're eager to give you a chance at this thing called management. Here's how it works. Like with all roles, the first 3 months is a trial period. We want to see, can you deliver? Are you doing well? And, if that isn't the case, that's not the end of the world, right? We all try things. We all fail occasionally, and, that can happen. But if you do fail, it doesn't mean we don't have the space for you. It just means that, we might need to move you back to what you used to do or find something else for you, right? But really, we try and make it clear to people when we promote them that, there is definitely a trial period because not everyone is going to succeed from day one. Again, the more exposure they've had, the more growth they've had prior to being put into the role, the more likely they are to succeed. What I would say is, personally, I very, very, very rarely hire senior roles from the outside. What we do hire from the outside is specialists. So for example, if we need a high-level PPC Facebook ads guy, we would happily hire them from the outside because that might be a skill set we don't have in-house. However, what happens is when you have an organization where you start putting people in the top or somewhere in the middle, what happens is the impact is significantly higher. And the challenge is that the uncertainty, when you hire someone that you've never worked with before and put them into your organization, the level of risk that put at the company is significant. And I've seen multiple companies putting in either CEOs or COOs that have had a great track record, have great attitude and everything, but they just have not worked out in the company, right? So sometimes they just had some ideas that was very different. They've had very different ways of doing things, and somehow it just doesn't work out. And I've seen at least 2 companies absolutely break the neck. One of them on a COO particular that just, went in, tried to implement a whole host of new systems and things that they were used to doing in a way they were used to doing it. And it just did not work out for the company, and the company literally went under because the cost, right? So the cost of trying out things and doing things and not succeeding with it was too much, right? So we definitely try and hire great people at the bottom of the food chain, if you will, and then promoting them up to in the company, because that way you also sustain your culture. The two key things is, 1, you sustain your culture, and 2, you show people in your organization that there are opportunities if you do a great job and if you keep investing in yourself and keep growing. And those are 2 of the core aspects, right? And I learned this from the corporate world as well. Like when you're looking at the big companies, like sometimes the CEO role can definitely change, but in a lot of cases, they're really promoting from within, right? They're putting in the effort to grow people to a level where they're capable of taking the next step. And Honestly, it's slightly cheaper for companies, and in the earlier days of businesses, that's a benefit. And two, you know what you're getting. So it doesn't mean they will always succeed, but you know what you're getting. So it's rarely gonna be a catastrophic failure if someone isn't working out in a role.
Let's take the case of like the busy founder who's doing, initially every role in the company. The company is growing. How do you go about figuring out who could become that COO? Because initially it's not even a developed role, because it's probably been taken place by the founder who's doing a bunch of other stuff. What is sort of the process of identifying that person, building out that role, and setting up the company for success there?
So rule number one is start early. So, and what I mean with that is it's way easier to learn to manage when it's 2 people than when it's 20. So one of the rules I have that I try and follow is that when you have 2 people doing the same role, one of them become the manager. So as a founder, like let's say you have 2 people doing customer service, make one of those people the team leader or the manager. Because here's the thing, it's one person less for you to report to. Now, just because they become a team leader or manager doesn't mean they don't do the work anymore. But if you start learning by managing one person, that is significantly easier than being thrown in the deep end and trying to manage 8 or 10 people or something like that, right? So number one is we just start early, because you see what happens. It rarely goes totally bananas if it's 2 people, right? And it helps grow the management skills at an earlier stage, and particularly having less people reporting to you as a CEO and founder, that's really, really important, right? So that way, by doing that, you're starting to build management skills within your team at an earlier stage, right? Now, the next piece is, again, if you take something different like marketing, right? Now, you could have one guy do Facebook ads, one guy do SEO, and one guy doing something else, and they're not necessarily, people don't necessarily know it all. And the good thing about management is you don't have to, right? Like, I can manage a sales team without being a great sales guy, right? You don't have to be great at what you're managing. Managing is learning to manage numbers and managing people. It is not about being an expert in the role. And this is, again, where most people go very wrong with management. Is you don't have to be the teacher. You don't have to have all the answers. You have to help people take ownership and figure stuff out. But you don't have to be the guy or girl with all the answers, right? So this is where it becomes really important to get into that management mindset. So again, if I have 3 marketing people, I will often look at them and seeing who is the best performer, who have the right cultural values, and put one of those into a leadership role, right? Because again, I don't want 3 different marketing people reporting directly to me as the CEO, because again, I try as a CEO, at a CEO level, I try to have 5 or maybe maximum 6 people report to me. And there's a very, very good reasons why all companies are generally structured in the same way. When you look at most organizations, right, they're CEO, and you have sales, marketing, operations, finance, and in some cases you have CTO with tech. But generally, majority of companies are really structured the same way, and there's a good reason for that. It works exceptionally well. So the big challenge many companies have is they get to a level where they have 20 or 30 people and they still don't have a COO, because they haven't actually been promoting people into leadership and managerial roles. And again, it's way harder to go in and take a role with 30 people than start learning with less people, right?
I think that's really interesting as well. And to speak to Nick's question of how to start and the best way to go about it, you're killing 2 birds with one stone. If you're a founder, you're juggling a million things. If you've got 2 people doing a role, I suppose it's really simple just to test the waters, make one of them in charge. You're reducing the amount of people that are reporting back to you, and you're already getting them starting on that learning management. So to speak to that, why do we think it is that founders find it so hard to actually delegate and make their lives easier by
the same reason as people? So it's mindset. So the thing is, again, if you, like, let's say you start out as a freelancer and then you turn into an agency maybe. again, you were successful as a freelancer, not because you never made mistakes, but because you were accountable and you made things happen, right? So link building, you deliver the links. Now, when people buy links from you, you deliver every time. And that's why you're successful. So the problem is when you move into an agency mode from being a freelancer, you're still in this individual contributor mindset. You're still in the, I need to. But the key thing about it is when you start managing other people, what you do doesn't matter anymore, right? It's the output of the team. And what happens with most people is that they really start micromanaging in the sense of they're not giving people responsibility. They end up just giving them tasks. And that's a lot of online gurus, unfortunately, that's basically teaching this bullshit. But they're basically saying, hey, figure out how to do something, put it into a process, hand it to Chris, and tell Chris to do this process, right? And while that's great, yes, you definitely want to document the knowledge you have in the business, but fundamentally, what you really, really want to do is that you really want to find people and give them ownership, right? You don't, number one, as a business owner, you should not be the one figuring out how to do everything. I can promise you, the CEO of IBM is not figuring out what 300,000 people are doing, right? They're not. So reality is, as a business owner, your goal is fundamentally to empower people to figure things out. And every time I talk to people about this, they always say, oh yeah, but they're not taking initiative. They're not doing this. They're not doing this. And I'm like, yep, because you're managing them, right? You're sitting on top of them. You're telling them what to do. You're telling them how to do it. You're not giving them ownership, right? So when you have the conversation, if I go to Chris and say, hey, Chris, I'm super busy as a CEO. I don't have the time to do our customer service. I love the way you talk to people. I love how you communicate. I want you to be responsible for this piece. Now, here's the process of what we're doing today. I'm sure as a smart human, you can do this even better, right? Now, here's what I need you to achieve. Number one, our goal as a company is to respond to every customer within 8 working hours or whatever. And number two is to make sure that every time we send out a customer satisfaction survey, we have at least a 95% happiness rate or whatever, right? So you give them ownership, you tell them exactly the area they have responsibility for, and you give them clear goals and objectives that they need to reach, right? The way, if you look at, again, you guys are link building a lot, so let's take that as an example. The problem is most people sit down and they say, hey, okay, Chris, you need to do this task. You need to send out 100 emails every single day. Here's exactly how you do it. Do that, right? Now, as a human being, that is not freaking exciting. You don't learn anything from it, and you have no ownership, right? You're literally told what to do, exactly how to do it. You have no goals except from press the button 100 times every single day. Now, the problem with something like that is if you open the phone book and send out 100 emails, or if you find some great sites to email to, the problem is you're not responsible for the outcome because someone told you exactly what to do and exactly how to do it. So if you fail, not your fault, right? If you succeed, not your fault, right? So you have no investment as an individual into it, right? And people are constantly doing this, and then they come to me and they're like, oh yeah, I don't get it. My staff is never suggesting how they can improve our processes. I'm like, no, because they don't know what the hell they're doing. They don't understand why they're doing it. They have no ownership. So no, of course they're not suggesting improvements because they literally don't know what they're doing.
So I'm curious, when you're talking about promoting someone who's a higher performer at your company, is there a situation where it makes more sense to look and see who is more enthusiastic? Let's say, like, take sales, for example. Let's say your highest performer isn't really as vocal as other people. Are you afraid of, like, if you promote this person to the head of sales, they start doing more management, now you've lost your best salesperson working full time? Is that a concern when you're thinking about who to, I can see you smiling, so I think I know your answer, but is that a concern when you're thinking about who's the right person to manage this? Do they need to be the top performer, or should they be the person who is the most enthusiastic, the most interested in talking with other people?
I mean, in the end of the day, you don't want to promote someone who don't want to be promoted, right? your goal as a manager is to help motivate your best people to be excited about it. Because here's the thing, when you promote your best people, what you're fundamentally saying is, I want you to teach everyone else to be as good as you, right? So whenever you're promoting someone, you're really making their performance, what they used to do, you're making that the benchmark for other people. That means if you promote your best people, you're showing everyone else what it takes to succeed. And you're giving them the ownership and responsibility and say, hey, you're great at this thing. I want you to bring everyone else up to your level. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. And how do you determine what motivates your team then? Like, is that something which should be like formally addressed and understood by founders, and then, or is that something that happens more on a one-on-one basis and is quite unique to each individual?
It's not necessarily unique at an individual level per se, but people are different, right? So I spend a lot of time going in details around personality with the DISC framework, and that's definitely my go-to, because that helps you understand people, and based on the sort of personality, you have a very good understanding of what their core motivation is. So different people are motivated by different things, but there's a number of sort of personality types. So when you look at many SEOs, for example, they are often motivated by being right the most. They when you look at all these stupid discussion in SEO groups of, hey, this is the best way of doing it. No, this is the best way, and this is the right way. Like, most of these guys are not motivated by money. They're motivated by showing off their big brains and how smart they are and how they know stuff that someone else doesn't know, and so on. And that's okay. People are motivated by different things, and understanding someone's motivation helps you understand how to get the most out of it, right? So really understanding, like, very few people are actually motivated predominantly by money. And the problem is a larger proportion of business owners are motivated by money, and therefore they assume everyone else thinks like they think, and therefore they try and motivate everyone with money on their own, and that's often not the driver. I mean, honestly, the best people I have in my business are not necessarily paid exceptionally well, but they're getting great opportunities. They're getting to grow. They're getting to experience things. They definitely have a great life, and for many people, that's the most important. It's not always about how do you make a little bit more money or whatever.
So how do you uncover specifically what is important, and then how do you work that into sort of their compensation or their job?
Yeah, I mean, this is a significantly longer topic, going into sort of behavior and personality and all this sort of stuff, right? So I'm not sure we can cover it all here, but generally in terms of, you can ask people. Some people know themselves very well, some people don't. But you can definitely start by asking people, say, hey, what motivates you? What makes you excited? What do you care about in life? And here's the thing, for some people, it's private stuff. Some people, it's like, I have a horse at home, and every day my goal is to finish work so I can go ride my horse, because that's all that matters to me. And you're like, great, awesome. Let me see how I can enable you to finish your work faster, get more done, and deliver faster so that you can go ride your horse more, right? So again, knowing and understanding people's motivation as a manager is really your sort of core ability to impact and influence people.
Yeah, and I guess it's important not to have a one-size-fits-all approach, because you're not going to empower an entire team if you're just saying to everybody, you can all get paid a bit more, whereas one person wants to see their horse, one person wants to get to the pub on, as early as possible on a Friday. So, I mean, yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, Mads, let's take a hypothetical business that is an anti-Mads person. They don't implement anything that you teach. They give zero ownership, and everything is done based on tasks, and they don't hire within, promote within. They always hire externally. How would you advise a business to move away from this approach? How easy is it to get started, and how quickly do you think that they would see the results and the benefits?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, when I start working with people, it's typically a 2-day thing, so it doesn't take forever to go through it. So obviously the best way is to call myself or call someone else. I mean, that there's a fair few people in the space, right? So But really getting people in, and what I tend to do is I start working with the entire organization. So the problem is if you just start working with the top of the organization, it is then their responsibility to cascade things down, and that can sometimes be hard, right? So I tend to go in and work with the business owners, the managers, and the entire management team, because then you get everyone on the same page at the same time. And honestly, from my experience, for a lot of companies, a couple of days is really all it takes to really cause significant change and really empower people and enable people to do things differently. Now, obviously, there is some follow-up implementation, but I would say about 60 to 70% of our clients really have enough with the 2 days. And then obviously some of them want additional follow-up or additional coaching and so on, which is great. But really it's not rocket science. And again, getting a lot of it is getting the right mindsets and really getting the right sort of systems set up and implemented. And that's really the core that it takes.
Should all companies have an HR person, or what stage should companies think about hiring an HR person that's full-time, managing people and the different things that go with that?
Yeah, HR have a little bit of a funny rep. I would say from my point of view, for the companies I've run, we definitely have a HR person at a relatively early state, particularly if it's a relatively fast-growing company. And the most important aspect of it is really recruitment. And the thing is, in many companies, you have the business owner or you have the managers who's sitting around doing all the recruitment. And here's the thing, business is all about spending your time on the things that makes a difference. And while recruitment do make a difference, there's a ton of stuff in the recruitment process that is very time consuming. So taking a job post, publishing it on a bunch of different sites, getting a million emails, identifying the right people to talk with and so on. There's a lot of stuff that can be done by a relatively smart, low-level person, right? So pretty much in all of our companies, we bring in, I would say, probably employee number 4 or 5 or 6 or something. We bring in typically a lower cost. So it doesn't necessarily need to be a Western, but we bring in a HR person who can really help the team with recruitment so that, the managers actually, I've walked into companies where, I look at a manager's email and all they have in their email is resumes from like 400 people, and, their email box is blown to pieces. And that is definitely not effective, right? So, even separating that out in a separate email or whatever helps a ton, but it's relatively easy to have someone sort of organize all of that and take care of all of that, right? So that's typically where we tend to start.
Right. Mads, it's been very eye-opening. Me and Nick, I'm sure we'll be chatting after this podcast. As we wrap up and we get towards the end, AI is obviously impacting and shifting every aspect of the modern age of business. How are you seeing the interaction between AI and management today, and how do you foresee that developing into the future?
Yeah, I think AI is very interesting. People are sitting around thinking, oh, everyone's going to get fired. And I don't necessarily see that. What I see is that, yeah, you can do more things. But really, if you have 10 staff today and you have 10 staff in 5 years' time, like those 10 staff can just do a lot more stuff, right? So they can do a lot more stuff, hopefully make more money. But just because you have staff, like when you have good people that suddenly don't need to do this stuff because a bunch of it could be automated, that means they can do other good stuff, right? So I don't necessarily see like a firing frenzy all across the board. Now, there's probably some roles where right now there's some very low-level staff who might not be super skilled. Some of those might lose their job, but in general, with good, decent companies, like I don't actually see necessarily a lot of people losing their jobs. I just see people sort of moving into different areas and in different areas of the business where there's actually a need, right? So from a management standpoint, we're building a cool tool called HeyRamp.com, which is all about sort of management. And we are trying to utilize AI a little bit in there. But I don't really foresee it to change a ton, because fundamentally management is about people and it's about building relationships with people and so on. And where obviously certain processes can maybe be made slightly more effective and so on. One of the things we're using AI for is, for example, summarizing, performance data over time and stuff like that. So where, as a manager, you might spend less time having to evaluate, like, let's say you're doing a yearly review with someone, like, yeah, you can probably do that sort of review faster with AI data and so on. But in the end of the day, it's still humans you're dealing with, and you still need to be dealing with humans. Okay?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Mads, I think that's a perfect spot to wrap up. Where can people go to learn more about you?
mattsingers.com is definitely a great place. That's my website, and on all social media, Matt Singers. I'm the only one in the world so far with this name, so hope no one else steals it.
Or at the bar of the next conference that you go to. That's a good place, isn't it?
Yep.
Okay, well, Mads, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
Great seeing you guys.
3, 2, 1, yeah!
And that wraps up this episode of Market Movers Building Brands and Links with Linkify. Big thanks to our parent company, Linkifi, the wizards behind turning ambitious businesses into standout brands. Hit up our website at linkify.io and take the first steps towards brand greatness. Big shout out to Fame for making this podcast possible. Thanks for listening, folks. Stick around for more insights in our next episode. Catch you later.